What happens when a king dies? Does his queen fade into the background, a silent figure in black, her purpose fulfilled? What if her real story was just beginning? History is filled with women who were defined by their husbands, their value tied to producing a male heir. But for some, a husband's death was not an end. It was an opportunity. What did they do when they were suddenly left in a world of ambitious men, all vying for the throne their young son was meant to inherit? How does a woman, seen as weak and secondary, command armies, outwit spies, and rule an empire? These are the stories of women who stepped out from the shadows of their husbands' coffins and into the center of power. They were not just survivors, they became rulers in their own right, more influential, more feared, and more powerful than they ever were as wives. Number 15, why would a queen wear a fake beard? She ruled for 22 years as a full pharaoh of Egypt. Her trade expeditions brought back immense wealth, including live mercuries. She commissioned hundreds of construction projects, so many that almost every major museum in the world with an Egyptian collection has artifacts from her reign. After her death, her successor tried to erase her from history, chiseling her name and image from monuments. Her name was Hatshepsut. She was not supposed to rule. She was the daughter of one pharaoh, Thutmose I, and the wife of another, her half-brother Thutmose II. Her role was clear. She was the great royal wife. Her duty was to provide a male heir, but her husband was frail. He died young, leaving behind only one son, a boy born to a lesser wife. This boy, Thutmose III, was a child. He could not rule alone. Hatshepsut stepped in. At first she acted as a traditional regent. She was the queen mother, guiding the hand of the young pharaoh. Her name appeared alongside his on official documents, but this was not enough for her. Egypt had faced instability before. A female regent was a temporary solution. Hatshepsut wanted something permanent. She wanted power that no one could take away. So she did something unprecedented. She declared herself pharaoh. This was not a simple act. The pharaoh was more than a king. He was a god on earth, a male Horus. A woman could not be Horus. The entire religious and political structure of Egypt was built on this male succession, and Hatshepsut needed to convince the court, the priests, and the people that her rule was legitimate. She started a brilliant propaganda campaign. She claimed the god Amun-Ra had appeared to her mother in the form of her father and conceived her. This made her the divine daughter of the greatest god. She was not just a regent for her stepson. She was chosen by the gods to rule. She adopted all the pharaonic titles. She took on a new name, Ma'at-Keri, which meant truth is the soul of Ra. And to complete the transformation, she changed her image. In statues and reliefs, she was depicted as a man. She wore the traditional kilt of the pharaohs. She was shown with a male body. And she wore the false beard, a symbol of pharaonic power. This was not about denying her gender. Everyone knew she was a woman. It was about fitting herself into the established iconography of kingship. She was showing the world that she held the same authority as any male pharaoh before her. Her reign was a period of peace and prosperity. She did not focus on military conquest like many pharaohs. Instead, she focused on rebuilding Egypt and expanding its trade networks. She restored temples that had been neglected. Her greatest achievement was her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, a stunning terraced structure built into a cliffside. Its walls tell the story of her divine birth and her greatest accomplishments, including a famous trading expedition to the land of Punt. The reliefs show Egyptian ships returning with gold, ivory, exotic animals, and most importantly, 31 live mercuries, which were then planted in the gardens of her temple. It was a massive success that brought incredible wealth and prestige to Egypt. She ruled for over 2 decades. She gave Egypt stability and riches. She built monuments that would stand for millennia. When she died, her stepson Thutmose III finally took the throne he had waited for. For many years, he seemed to respect her legacy, but late in his reign, he ordered Hatshepsut's name to be removed from monuments. Her statues were smashed and buried. He tried to write her out of the official king lists, replacing her name with his father's or his own. He wanted to pretend her reign never happened. For centuries, it worked. Historians knew little about her. And it was only in the 19th century that archaeologists began to piece together her story, uncovering the remarkable tale of the woman who became a king. Number 14. What power lies behind a silk screen? She entered the Forbidden City as a low-ranking concubine. She never officially ruled China. She controlled the empire for nearly 50 years from behind a yellow silk screen. She suppressed massive rebellions, dealt with encroaching foreign powers, and oversaw the beginning of China's modernization. She was blamed by many for the fall of her dynasty. This was Empress Dowager Cixi. Her story began not in power, but in obscurity. She was one of many young Manchu women chosen for the Xianfeng Emperor's court in 1852. She was beautiful and intelligent. More importantly, in 1856, she gave the emperor his only surviving son. This elevated her status immediately. She became the noble consort Yi. The emperor's primary wife, the empress consort Zhen, was childless. When the emperor died in 1861, their son was only 5 years old. The emperor had appointed a council of 8 regents to rule until his son came of age. Cixi and the Empress Zhen were given the titles of Empress Dowager. They were supposed to have no political power. They were just mothers. The regents saw them as ornaments. This was their first mistake. Cixi was not an ornament. She was a political operator. She formed an alliance with Prince Gong, the late emperor's ambitious brother, who had been excluded from the Regency Council. Together, they planned a coup. From the imperial summer resort where the emperor had died, Cixi and the other Empress Dowager, Xian, had the official imperial seals. The regents had the young emperor. Neither could issue a valid edict without the other. Cixi acted quickly. She smuggled a message to Prince Gong in Beijing. He prepared his forces. When the emperor's funeral procession returned to the capital, Prince Gong's soldiers arrested the 8 regents. They were accused of treason. 3 were executed. The others were stripped of their titles. Just a few months after her husband's death, Cixi had seized control of the government. She did not take the throne herself. That would have been impossible. Instead, she and the Empress Dowager Xian became co-regents for the young Tongji emperor. The official term was ruling from behind the curtain. During court audiences, the boy emperor would sit on the throne. Behind him, a silk screen was placed. Cixi and Xian would sit behind it, invisible to the court officials. They would listen to the reports and make the decisions. The child on the throne was just a mouthpiece. In reality, Cixi was the dominant partner. Xian was quiet and uninterested in politics. Cixi was sharp, decisive, and ruthless. She learned quickly. She studied state documents. She sought advice from capable officials like Prince Gong. Under her early rule, the Qing dynasty experienced a brief period of stability known as the Tongji Restoration. The government suppressed the massive Taiping Rebellion, which had ravaged southern China for years. They also began the self-strengthening movement, a program of adopting Western technology and military techniques to modernize China. Her son, the Tongji Emperor, was a disappointment. He chafed under his mother's control and died at the age of 18 without an heir. This created a succession crisis. Cixi acted decisively. She broke the rules of succession and chose her 3-year-old nephew as the new emperor, the Guangxu Emperor. This allowed her to continue her regency. She ruled from behind the screen for decades more. Her long reign was a constant struggle. She had to balance conservative Manchu interests with the need for reform. She had to contend with increasing foreign aggression, losing wars to France and Japan. Her most controversial moment came in 1900 with the Boxer Rebellion, an anti-foreign, anti-Christian uprising. Initially, she supported the Boxers, hoping they could drive out the foreigners. It was a disastrous miscalculation. An 8-nation alliance invaded China and occupied Beijing. Cixi was forced to flee the capital. She returned a year later, humbled. She accepted the humiliating peace terms. In her final years, she seemed to realize that deep reform was necessary to save the dynasty. She authorized a series of political and educational changes, but it was too little, too late. She died in 1908, just one day after the death of the Guangxu emperor, whom many believe she had poisoned. 3 years after her death, the Qing dynasty, which she had held together for half a century, collapsed. Cixi remains a controversial figure. Was she a monster who clung to power and doomed China, or was she a pragmatic leader who did her best to navigate an impossible situation, holding a crumbling empire together against overwhelming odds? Number 13, can a woman be more dangerous than an army? She was the wife of one Roman emperor and the mother of another. She was accused of poisoning her rivals, her stepsons, and even her own husband, the Emperor Augustus. For 50 years, she was the most powerful woman in Rome, a political player in a world where women were supposed to have no public voice. Her name was Livia Drusilla. Livia was born into a prestigious Roman family. Her first marriage was to a cousin, Tiberius Claudius Nero. They had two sons, Tiberius and Drusus. They were on the losing side of the civil wars that followed the death of Julius Caesar. They had to flee Rome, but Livia was intelligent and charming. She caught the eye of the man who would become the first Roman emperor, Octavian, later known as Augustus. Octavian was married, Livia was married and pregnant with her second child. It didn't matter. Octavian divorced his wife. He forced Livia's husband to divorce her. In 38 BC, they were married just 3 days after she gave birth to her second son. It was a political match, but it became a genuine partnership. Augustus valued her counsel. She was his most trusted advisor. In public, she was the model Roman matron, modest, dignified, loyal. Behind the scenes, she was deeply involved in the affairs of state. And Augustus had no sons of his own. The question of his successor loomed over his long reign. This is where Livia's influence became immense, and her reputation turned dark. Augustus had a daughter, Julia, from his first marriage. He first designated his nephew Marcellus as his heir. Marcellus died suddenly. Then he chose his loyal general, Agrippa, who married Julia. They had two sons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar. But Augustus adopted them as his own and made them his heirs. But then Agrippa died. Not long after, Lucius and Gaius also died, one of sickness, one from a wound. With every potential heir's death, Livia's own son from her first marriage, Tiberius, moved one step closer to the throne. Roman historians like Tacitus and Cassius Dio paint a chilling picture. They suggest Livia was systematically removing every obstacle in her son's path. Was she a serial poisoner? There is no concrete proof, but the string of convenient deaths was suspicious. In a world of political intrigue and sudden illness, rumors were potent weapons. Whether she was guilty or not, many Romans believed she was. Her final alleged victim was Augustus himself. In 14 AD, the old emperor fell ill and died. The official story was natural causes. But rumors swirled that Livia had poisoned his figs. With Augustus gone, her son Tiberius became emperor. Livia's power reached its peak. She was now the mother of the emperor. Augustus had adopted her into his family in his will, giving her the title Augusta. She was effectively a co-ruler. Tiberius, however, was a resentful son. He had been forced into the role of emperor and felt overshadowed by his domineering mother. He grew to despise her interference. He blocked the Senate from giving her more titles. He avoided her company. Eventually, he retired from Rome to the island of Capri, some say, to escape her influence. Livia continued to wield power in Rome. She managed her own vast fortune. She had a network of clients and allies. She was a major public figure. When she died in 29 AD at the age of 86, Tiberius refused to return for her funeral. He vetoed the honors the Senate wanted to grant her. It was a final act of defiance against the mother who had, by ambition and perhaps by darker means, put him on the throne. Livia was a new kind of Roman woman. She operated not with armies or legions, but with intelligence, influence, and a reputation for utter ruthlessness. She showed that in the corridors of power, a whisper could be as deadly as a sword. Number 12, can a mother's ambition create a monster? She was the sister of one emperor, the wife of another, and the mother of a third. She returned from exile to become the most powerful woman in the Roman Empire. She allegedly poisoned her husband so her son could take the throne. That son was Nero. Her name was Agrippina the Younger. Agrippina was born into the heart of the imperial family. She was the great-granddaughter of Augustus. Her brother was the Emperor Caligula. Her life was one of privilege, but also extreme danger. The imperial court was a nest of conspiracies. Caligula was unstable and paranoid. He accused Agrippina and her sister of being involved in a plot against him. He exiled them to a remote island. Her fortunes changed when Caligula was assassinated. Her uncle Claudius became the new emperor. Claudius was much older, but he recalled Agrippina from exile. He was married to the infamous Messalina. But Messalina overplayed her hand, and Claudius had her executed. This created a power vacuum. Agrippina saw her chance. She seduced her uncle Claudius. It was an incestuous union, shocking even to Roman society. But Agrippina was persuasive. She convinced Claudius to marry her. In 49 AD, she became his fourth wife and the empress. She immediately began to consolidate her power. She was given the title of Augusta, an honor Livia had only received after Augustus's death. She had her own guards. She appeared on coins alongside Claudius. Her main goal was to secure the throne for her son from a previous marriage, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, the future Nero. Claudius already had a son, Britannicus, who was the rightful heir. Agrippina worked systematically to sideline him. She had Britannicus's tutors replaced with her own loyalists. She convinced Claudius to adopt her son, giving him the name Nero Claudius Caesar. She arranged for Nero to marry Claudius's daughter Octavia. Nero was older than Britannicus, and Agrippina promoted him at every opportunity. By 54 AD, Claudius seemed to be having second thoughts. He was growing fonder of his own son, Britannicus. He started making comments about letting the true heir take his place. Agrippina could not allow that. According to Roman historians, she decided to act. She served Claudius a plate of his favorite dish mushrooms. But these mushrooms were laced with poison. Claudius died. Agrippina moved with incredible speed. She kept Claudius's death a secret for several hours. She used that time to secure the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's bodyguard. She presented her 16-year-old son, Nero, to them. They acclaimed him emperor. By the time Claudius's death was announced to the public, Nero's succession was a done deal. Britannicus was left with nothing. For the first few years of Nero's reign, Agrippina was the true ruler. She was the power behind the throne. She met with ambassadors. Her image appeared on the coinage, facing her son as an equal. The Senate held its meetings at the palace, so she could listen from behind a curtain. She had achieved her ultimate ambition, but she had created a monster. Nero began to resent his mother's control. He was encouraged by his advisors, Seneca and Burrus, who wanted to sideline her. He started an affair with a former slave girl, much to Agrippina's fury. The power struggle between mother and son grew more intense. Agrippina threatened to support Britannicus as the rightful emperor. Shortly after, Britannicus died at a dinner party. Most believed Nero had him poisoned. Nero now decided he had to get rid of his mother. It proved to be difficult. First, he tried poison, but she had supposedly built up an immunity. Then he designed a special boat that was meant to collapse and sink while she was on board. The boat did collapse, but Agrippina was a strong swimmer and made it to shore. Finally, Nero gave up on subtlety. He sent assassins to her villa. When they arrived, she reportedly bared her womb and said, "Strike here." She knew that the son she had put on the throne would be the one to end her life. Agrippina's story is a chilling tale of ambition. She was a brilliant political strategist who outmaneuvered all her rivals to place her son on the throne. But in her quest for power, she unleashed one of Rome's most infamous tyrants. Number 11, how do you rule a kingdom that hates you? She was a French princess who became the Queen of England. Her son was a child king in a country torn by civil war. She raised an army and led the Lancastrian faction in the Wars of the Roses for years. She was called the She-Wolf of France, a warrior queen who was more feared than loved. This was Margaret of Anjou. Margaret was married to King Henry VI of England in 1445. It was a political marriage, part of a peace treaty between England and France after the 100 Years' War. But the English people hated the treaty. They felt they had given up too much, and they blamed the new French queen. From the very beginning, Margaret was unpopular. Her husband, Henry VI, was a weak and ineffective ruler. He was pious and gentle, but he had no interest in government or warfare. He suffered from bouts of mental illness that left him completely unresponsive for months at a time. The English court was dominated by powerful and feuding nobles. The most powerful was Richard, Duke of York. He had a strong claim to the throne himself. For the first 8 years of her marriage, Margaret was childless. Her position was insecure, but in 1453 she gave birth to a son, Edward of Westminster. This should have secured the Lancastrian dynasty. But just as his son was born, King Henry suffered a complete mental breakdown. He didn't even recognize his own child. With the king incapacitated, Richard of York was made protector of the realm. He was now the ruler of England in all but name. Margaret was furious. She was the queen, the mother of the heir. She believed she should be regent. But the English lords did not trust the French woman. They excluded her from power. This was the moment Margaret transformed from a consort into a political leader. She saw York as a direct threat to her son's inheritance. When King Henry unexpectedly recovered his sanity in 1455, Margaret convinced him to dismiss York. York responded by raising an army. The first battle of the Wars of the Roses was fought at St. Albans. Where York's forces won, the king was captured. For the next few years, an uneasy peace held, but Margaret was secretly building her own faction. She gathered allies among the nobles who were rivals of the Duke of York. She became the undeniable leader of the Lancastrian cause. She was intelligent, proud, and utterly determined. While her husband drifted in and out of sanity, she was the one who made the decisions, raised the funds, and planned the strategy. In 1459, the war broke out again in earnest. At first, Margaret's forces were successful. They drove York into exile. But the following year, York's allies returned and captured King Henry at the Battle of Northampton. York returned to London and laid his hand on the throne, claiming it for himself. A compromise was reached. King Henry would remain king for life, but York and his sons would inherit the crown, disinheriting Margaret's own son. Margaret refused to accept this. She would not see her son pushed aside. She fled to the north of England and Scotland, where she raised a new, massive army. She was a formidable sight, riding with her soldiers, inspiring them to fight for her and her son. In December 1460, her army met the Duke of York's forces at the Battle of Wakefield. The Lancastrians won a decisive victory. Richard of York was killed in the battle. Margaret ordered his head to be cut off and placed on the gates of the city of York, wearing a paper crown. For a brief time it seemed she had won. She marched her army south towards London. But her northern army had a reputation for being unruly and plundering the countryside. This terrified the people of London, who refused to open the city gates to her. Meanwhile, the Duke of York's eldest son, Edward, had raised another army. He was a brilliant military commander. He defeated a Lancastrian army and then marched to London, where he was proclaimed King Edward IV. Margaret was forced to flee again, this time to France. For years, she lived in exile, tirelessly trying to gain support to put her son back on the throne. She eventually formed an unlikely alliance with her former enemy, the Earl of Warwick, who had fallen out with King Edward IV. In 1470, they invaded England and briefly restored Henry VI to the throne, but their success was short-lived. Edward either returned from his own exile the next year. At the Battle of Tewkesbury, the Lancastrian army was finally crushed. Margaret's beloved son, Edward of Westminster, was killed. King Henry VI was murdered in the Tower of London shortly after. Margaret's cause was lost. Her husband and son were dead. She was captured and imprisoned for several years before being ransomed by the King of France. She returned to her home country a broken woman and died in poverty. She was a queen who fought with more courage and determination than any king. She was hated in England as a foreign meddler, but she was the heart and soul of the Lancastrian cause for nearly 2 decades. Number 10. How does a saint rule a country? She was a Spanish princess who became Queen of France. Her husband died, leaving her with a 12-year-old son as king. The powerful French nobles thought they could control her. Instead, she crushed their rebellions. She ruled France as regent with an iron will, securing the throne for her son, who would become one of France's greatest kings. She was so pious and just that her son later tried to have her made a saint. This was Blanche of Castile. Blanche was the granddaughter of the formidable Eleanor of Aquitaine. She was chosen to marry the heir to the French throne, Louis, in 1200. It was a political alliance meant to bring peace between France and England. For over 20 years, she was a supportive, if unremarkable, queen consort. She gave her husband, King Louis V, 12 children. In 1226, everything changed. King Louis V died suddenly from dysentery while on a military campaign in the south of France. Their eldest son, also named Louis, was only 12. A child on the throne was a recipe for disaster. The great feudal lords of France saw an opportunity to reclaim the power they had lost to the monarchy. They saw Blanche as a foreigner, a Spanish woman, and a weak regent they could easily manipulate. They underestimated her completely. Blanche acted with stunning speed. Within days of her husband's death, she had her son crowned as King Louis IX in Reims. It was a rush ceremony, and many of the most powerful nobles deliberately stayed away. They began to form a coalition against her. They plotted to kidnap the young king. Blanche was a brilliant politician. She knew she could not fight all the nobles at once. So she used diplomacy to divide them. She made alliances with some, promising them land or titles. She isolated the most dangerous, like the powerful Count of Champagne. When the rebellious lords raised an army, she did not back down. She raised her own army and rode with it, taking her young son with her. She presented herself not as a power-hungry regent, but as a devoted mother protecting her son's rightful inheritance. This was a powerful image that won her popular support. For years, she put down one rebellion after another. She was tireless. She moved around the country, securing loyalties and confronting her enemies. She negotiated treaties. She managed the kingdom's finances with great skill. She was a firm and just ruler, but she could be ruthless when necessary. She defeated a coalition of nobles, and when the English king, Henry III, tried to take advantage of the chaos by invading, she repelled his forces as well. By 1234, when her son Louis came of age, she handed him a kingdom that was united, stable, and more powerful than the one she had inherited. Even after her official regency ended, her influence remained immense. Louis IX adored his mother and trusted her judgment completely. He continued to rely on her as his chief advisor. She was the one who arranged his marriage. She remained a powerful force at court, so much so that Louis's young wife was often jealous of their close bond. In 1248, King Louis IX decided to lead the Seventh Crusade to the Holy Land. It was a deeply personal religious mission for him. He was going to be gone for years. There was only one person he trusted to rule France, in his absence, his mother. So, at the age of 60, Blanche of Castile became regent of France for a second time. She ruled for 4 more years. She continued to govern effectively, keeping the peace and managing the constant need for funds to supply her son's crusade. It was a difficult task. The crusade was not going well, and Louis was eventually captured in Egypt. And Blanche had to raise a massive ransom for his release. The stress took a toll on her health. She died in 1252, while her son was still in the Holy Land. When Louis heard the news of her death, he was devastated and reportedly did not speak to anyone for 2 days. Blanche of Castile was one of the most successful rulers of the Middle Ages. She was a foreign queen who won the respect of a hostile court. She took over a kingdom on the brink of civil war and transformed it into a stable and prosperous state. She not only saved the throne for her son, but laid the foundation for his celebrated reign. He became known as Saint Louis, the model of a medieval king. But behind the great king was an even greater queen mother. Number 9, can a woman blind her own son for power? She was an empress of the Byzantine Empire. She ruled as regent for her young son. When he grew up and tried to claim power for himself, she had him deposed, arrested, and blinded. She then became the first woman to rule the Roman Empire in her own right, not as a regent, but as a full-fledged emperor, or Basileus. Her name was Irene of Athens. Irene came to Constantinople from Athens in 769 to marry the Byzantine heir Leo IV. She was known for her beauty. When her husband became emperor, she became empress consort. They had one son, Constantine VI. The Byzantine court was deeply divided by a religious controversy over the use of icons. The iconoclasts, including Emperor Leo IV, believed that worshipping images was a form of idolatry and ordered them to be destroyed. Irene, however, secretly favored the use of icons. In 780, her husband Leo IV died. Her son, Constantine VI, was only 9 years old, and Irene became regent. She immediately faced a plot to place Leo's half-brother on the throne. Irene acted decisively. She had the conspirators arrested, tonsured, and exiled. She forced the half-brothers to become priests, making them ineligible for the throne. She had secured her position. Her main goal was to end iconoclasm and restore the veneration of icons. This was a hugely controversial move. The army, in particular, was staunchly iconoclast. Irene moved carefully. She replaced key military commanders and officials with her own supporters. In 787, she convened a church council, the Second Council of Nicaea. The council formally condemned iconoclasm and restored the use of icons in churches. It was a major victory for Irene and defined her reign. As her son Constantine grew older, he began to resent his mother's absolute control. He was the emperor, but she held all the real power. The military, still unhappy about the restoration of icons, supported him. In 790, a military revolt forced Irene to step down. Constantine VI became the sole ruler. But Constantine was an inexperienced and poor ruler. He made disastrous military decisions. He alienated the church and the people with his personal life, divorcing his wife and marrying his mistress. His popularity plummeted. Irene saw her opportunity to return. She was still a powerful figure with many supporters at court. She began to plot against her own son. In 797, her conspiracy came to fruition. With the help of high-ranking officials, she had Constantine VI captured as he tried to flee the capital. He was brought back to the palace, to the very room where he had been born. There, on his mother's orders, his eyes were gouged out. The act was meant to make him ineligible to rule ever again. He was then imprisoned in a monastery, where he died shortly after from his wounds. Irene now ruled alone. This was unprecedented. Other women had been regents, but none had claimed the title of emperor. Irene signed documents as Irene Basilis's, the male form of emperor, not the female Basilissa. Her image appeared alone on the gold coins of the empire. She was the absolute ruler. Her 5-year reign was troubled. The empire faced threats from the Arabs in the east and the Bulgars in the west. The state treasury was depleted, and her position as a female emperor was not universally accepted, especially in Western Europe. In the year 800, Pope Leo III crowned the Frankish king Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans. One of the justifications was that the throne in Constantinople was vacant, as it was held by a woman. There were even talks of a marriage between Irene and Charlemagne to unite the two empires, but nothing came of it. In 802, Irene's reign came to an end. Her own finance minister, Nikephoros, led a palace coup against her. She was deposed and exiled to the island of Lesbos. Her wealth was confiscated, and she was forced to support herself by spinning wool. She died there less than a year later. Irene's story is one of the most brutal in the history of female rulers. She was a capable administrator, and she settled one of the great religious disputes of her time. But her legacy will forever be stained by the ruthless ambition that led her to depose and blind her own son. Number 8. How does a concubine become an emperor? She entered the palace as a teenage concubine. She became an empress consort, then an empress dowager and regent. But that was not enough. She deposed her own sons, declared the start of a new dynasty, and ruled China as its one and only female emperor. And her name was Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian's journey to power was long and methodical. She first came to the court of Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty in the early 640s. She was intelligent and beautiful, but failed to become one of his favorites. When he died, all his childless concubines were sent to a Buddhist convent to live out their days. This should have been the end of her story, but Wu had made a powerful connection. She had begun an affair with the crown prince, Li Ji, while his father was still alive. When Li Ji became the new Emperor Gaozong, he remembered her. He brought her back from the convent to the palace. This was a major breach of Confucian ethics. She had been his father's concubine, but the emperor was infatuated. Wu was ruthlessly ambitious. The emperor's wife, Empress Wang, was childless. His favorite consort was also a rival. Wu Zetian set about eliminating them. According to traditional accounts, when Wu gave birth to a daughter, Empress Wang came to visit the baby. After she left, Wu smothered her own child and blamed the empress. The emperor, enraged and grief-stricken, believed her. He deposed Empress Wang and her ally, the consort. He made Wu Zetian his new empress consort in 655. As empress, her influence grew immensely. Emperor Gaozong was often in poor health. He suffered from strokes that affected his eyesight. He came to rely on Wu Zetian more and more. She sat in on court audiences, hidden behind a screen, just as Cixi would 1,000 years later. She was intelligent and had a keen understanding of politics. Soon she was making major decisions. They were known at court as the Two Sages. When Emperor Gaozong died in 683, their son Li Jie became Emperor Zhongzong. As Empress Dowager, Wu was the regent, but her son was independent and tried to assert his authority. Wu would not have it. Within 6 weeks, she had him deposed and put under house arrest. She replaced him with his younger, more pliable brother, Li Dan, who became Emperor Ruizong. But Emperor Ruizong was a puppet. Wu Zetian held all the power. She ruled from behind the throne for several years. She created a secret police force to eliminate her political opponents. Many members of the Tang imperial family and high-ranking officials were executed or forced to commit suicide on trumped-up charges. She was consolidating her power, preparing for her final, most audacious move. In 690, she decided she was done with regency. She forced her son, Emperor Ruizong, to abdicate. She then proclaimed the founding of a new dynasty, the Zhou. She took the title Shengshen Huangdi, Holy and Divine Emperor. A woman had never ruled China in her own right. She had broken every tradition. To justify her rule, she used Buddhist propaganda. Monks circulated a text that predicted the reincarnation of the Buddha Maitreya as a female monarch who would bring about an age of prosperity. She ruled as emperor for 15 years. Her reign was a complex period. She was a ruthless tyrant to her enemies, but she was also a capable and effective ruler. She promoted men of talent regardless of their aristocratic background. She reformed the civil service examination system, making it more meritocratic. She expanded the empire's territory. She was a great patron of Buddhism. As she grew older, her grip on power began to weaken. She spent more and more time with her favorites, the Zhang brothers, whose influence at court was resented. In 705, a group of loyalist court officials staged a palace coup. They executed the Zhang brothers and forced the ailing 80-year-old Wu Zetian to abdicate. They put her son, the former Emperor Zhongzong, back on the throne. The Tang dynasty was restored. Wu Zetian died later that year. Her legacy is one of China's most debated. For centuries, Confucian historians portrayed her as a wicked, power-hungry usurper who used murder and deceit to seize the throne. But in modern times, she has been re-evaluated. She is seen as a strong, decisive leader who broke the bonds of gender to rule a vast empire effectively. She remains the only woman in Chinese history to have ever held the title of emperor. Number 7. What is a kingdom worth to a mother? Her husband was captured in battle. Her son was too young to rule. To free her husband, she had to give up her 2 other sons as hostages. She was then accused of adultery, and her alleged lovers were publicly executed. Despite this, she ruled as regent and defended her son's kingdom against powerful enemies. She was Isabella of Angoulême, Queen of England. Isabella's story is often overshadowed by the more famous queens of her era. She was married in 1200 to King John of England. She was only about 12 years old. He was 33. The marriage was a political scandal. She had already been betrothed to another man, a powerful French lord. John's decision to marry her instead triggered a war with France, which ultimately cost England most of its continental territories, including Normandy. Isabella was Queen of England for 16 years. She gave John 5 children, including his heir, the future Henry III. But their marriage was not a happy one. John was a difficult, cruel, and suspicious man. He was notoriously unfaithful. There were rumors that Isabella also took lovers, and John may have had one of them killed. In 1216, King John died in the middle of a civil war known as the First Barons' War. His 9-year-old son was proclaimed King Henry III. The country was in chaos. Rebel barons, supported by a French army led by the French Prince Louis, controlled London and much of the East. Isabella's position was precarious. As a foreign queen, she was not trusted by the English barons. The regency was given to the respected English knight William Marshal. Isabella found herself with little influence in the country she was once queen of. In 1220, she made a startling decision. She left England and her young son, the king, behind. She returned to her native Angoulême in France, which she was supposed to inherit. And there, she married the man she had been betrothed to all those years ago, Hugh de Lusignan. It was a love match, but also a strategic one. The Lusignans were a powerful family, and the marriage secured her position in France. But she never gave up the title of Queen of England. This caused problems. She felt she was not being treated with the respect she deserved in the French court. She saw herself as a queen, not just a countess. Her pride and ambition were immense. She began to resent the growing power of the French king. In 1241, she and her husband Hugh organized a major rebellion against the French king Louis IX. She convinced her son, King Henry III of England, to support them by invading France. It was a disaster. The French king, the son of her old rival Blanche of Castile, was a brilliant military leader. He crushed the rebellion. Henry III's invasion failed. Hugh and Isabella were forced to submit. Isabella was humiliated. The French king called her a troublemaker. Legends grew around her. She was accused of plotting to poison the French king. And facing arrest, she fled to Fonterrada Abbey. She lived there for the last few years of her life, taking the veil as a nun. She died in 1246. Her legacy in England was complicated. By leaving her son, she had allowed capable men like William Marshal to secure his throne. But her later actions in France encouraging Henry III's disastrous invasion cost the English crown a great deal of money and prestige. She was a woman driven by pride and a fierce desire for the status she felt she was owed. She was a dowager queen who abandoned her son's kingdom only to try and use it as a weapon in her own personal power struggles decades later. Her story shows that a dowager queen's influence was not always for the good of the kingdom she left behind. Number 6, how do you run an empire from a harem? She was purchased as a slave in the Greek Isles. She became the favorite concubine of an Ottoman sultan. She was not his wife. She bore him several children. After his death, she ruled the vast Ottoman Empire as regent for her son and later her grandson. She was one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history, a central figure in the era known as the Sultanate of Women. Her name was Kozum Sultan. Kozum's story begins in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. She entered the imperial harem around 1604 as a gift for the young Sultan Ahmed I. She was about 15 years old. Her beauty and intelligence quickly captivated him. She became his Haseki Sultan, his chief consort and favorite. She had more power and a higher status than any other woman in the harem, but her power was entirely dependent on the Sultan. When Sultan Ahmed I died in 1617, Kozum's world was turned upside down. Her sons were too young to rule. The normal practice was for the new Sultan to execute all his brothers to prevent succession struggles. Ahmed, however, had broken with this tradition. He allowed his brother Mustafa to live. Mustafa became Sultan, and Kosem and her children were sent to the old palace, a place of retirement for the mothers of previous sultans. She had lost all her influence, but Mustafa was mentally unstable and was quickly deposed. Ahmed's other son from another woman, Osman II, took the throne. He saw Kosum's sons as a threat, but before he could act against them, he was overthrown and killed by the Janissaries, the elite infantry units. This chaos created an opportunity for Kozum. After another brief and disastrous reign by the unstable Mustafa, the court had no choice but to turn to Kozum's eldest surviving son, Murad. In 1623, The 11-year-old Murad IV became Sultan. Qasem Sultan returned from the old palace in triumph. She was now the Valid Sultan, the Queen Mother, and the official regent of the empire. For the next decade, she was the effective ruler of the Ottoman Empire. She attended meetings of the Imperial Council, the Divan, from behind a curtain. She appointed and dismissed grand viziers and other top officials. She controlled the state treasury. The empire was facing internal revolts and external threats, but she managed to hold it together. When Murad came of age, he was a ruthless and authoritarian ruler. He tried to push his mother aside and take full control. He was known for his brute strength and his strict prohibitions on coffee and tobacco. While he ruled with an iron fist, Qasem retained significant influence behind the scenes. She was too powerful to be completely sidelined. Murad IV died young in 1640 without a surviving son. His only surviving brother was Ibrahim, another of Qasem's sons. Ibrahim had spent years in the Cafeses the Cage, a part of the harem where potential heirs were kept in luxurious confinement to prevent them from plotting. The experience had left him mentally unstable. Qasem was reluctant to put him on the throne, but there were no other options. And Ibrahim's reign was a disaster. He was decadent and erratic. Qasem once again ran the empire, but her son's behavior became increasingly outrageous. Finally, in 1648, the Janissaries and the leading statesmen decided he had to go. They got Qasem's approval for a coup. Ibrahim was deposed and executed. His 7-year-old son, Mehmed IV, became the new sultan. This should have secured Qasem's position for another long regency. She was now not just the Valide Sultan, but the Buyuk Valide, the grandmother. But she had a rival, the new sultan's mother, Turhan Sultan. Turhan was young and ambitious. She did not want to be overshadowed by her powerful mother-in-law. A bitter power struggle erupted in the harem between the supporters of Qasem and the supporters of Turhan. It was a battle for control of the empire. Qasem was the experienced veteran. Turhan had the advantage of being the mother of the reigning sultan. The struggle lasted for 3 years. Qasem, fearing she was losing, allegedly plotted to depose her 7-year-old grandson and replace him with another grandson whose mother was more compliant. The plot was discovered. Turhan Sultan decided to act. On the night of September 2nd, 1651, her supporters, led by the chief black eunuch, stormed Qasem's apartments. The 60-year-old Qasem tried to hide, but she was found. She was dragged out and strangled with a curtain. Qasem Sultan's life was extraordinary. From a slave girl, she rose to rule one of the world's most powerful empires for decades. She was a master of political intrigue, a survivor who navigated the deadly politics of the Ottoman court. Her death marked a turning point, with power passing to a new generation, but her long reign from the harem remains a testament to the hidden power women could wield even in the most patriarchal of societies. Number 5, was she a poisoner or a peacemaker? She was an Italian noblewoman who became Queen of France. She was the mother of 3 French kings. For 30 years, she was at the center of the brutal French wars of religion. She was accused of using poison, practicing black magic, and orchestrating one of the worst massacres in French history. But she also fought tirelessly to hold France together and to forge a peace between Catholics and Protestants. Her name was Catherine de' Medici. Catherine came to France in 1533 to marry Henry, the second son of the French king. She was 14. She was an outsider, a merchant's daughter in a court of ancient nobility. For the first 10 years of her marriage, she was unable to have children, which put her position at risk. She finally gave birth to a son and then 9 more children. Her husband became King Henry II in 1547. But Catherine had little influence during his reign. The king was completely devoted to his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, who was 20 years older than him. And Diane was the real queen of the court. Catherine had to endure the humiliation of seeing her rival hold all the power. In 1559, her life changed forever. During a jousting tournament, King Henry II was mortally wounded by a lance splinter that pierced his eye, and he died 10 days later. Their 15-year-old son became King Francis II. Catherine was now the Queen Mother. She immediately banished Diane de Poitiers from court. She took her place at the center of power. Francis II was a sickly teenager, dominated by his wife Mary, Queen of Scots, and her powerful uncles, the Guise brothers. The Guises were fanatical Catholics. They began a harsh persecution of French Protestants known as Huguenots. This deepened the religious divisions in France. Catherine had little control, but less than 2 years later, Francis II died. Her second son, the 10-year-old Charles IX, became king. Catherine was appointed regent. Now, she had real power. Her main goal was to preserve the monarchy and the unity of France. The country was a powder keg of religious hatred. She tried to find a middle path. She pursued a policy of tolerance and compromise. She issued edicts that gave limited rights to the Huguenots. But it was too late. The religious fanaticism on both sides was too strong. In 1562, a massacre of Huguenots by the Duke of Guise's men triggered the start of the French Wars of Religion, a series of brutal civil wars that would tear France apart for more than 30 years. Catherine spent the rest of her life trying to navigate this conflict. She was a pragmatist. She would ally with the Huguenots one moment and the Catholics the next, always trying to keep the monarchy from being overwhelmed by either faction. She negotiated treaties and truces, but they never lasted. She was constantly trying to put out fires. Her darkest moment came in 1572. To seal a new peace treaty, she had arranged a marriage between her daughter Marguerite and the leading Huguenot prince, Henry of Navarre. The leading Huguenot nobles came to Paris for the wedding. A few days later, there was an assassination attempt on the main Huguenot leader, Admiral Coligny. He was wounded, but not killed. Fearing a Huguenot uprising in revenge, Catherine and King Charles IX made a fateful decision. According to traditional accounts, they authorized a preemptive strike to kill the Huguenot leaders. On the night of August 24th, St. Bartholomew's Day, the killing began, but it quickly spiraled out of control. The Catholic mobs of Paris went on a rampage, slaughtering thousands of Huguenots' men, women, and children. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre was a horrific atrocity that forever tarnished Catherine's name. Historians still debate her exact role and motivations. Was she an evil mastermind, or did she lose control of a situation she helped create? Her son, Charles IX, never recovered from the horror of the massacre. He died 2 years later. Her third son, Henry III, became king. Catherine continued to be his chief advisor, working tirelessly to end the civil wars. But the country was more divided than ever. She died in 1589, just a few months before her last son, Henry III, was assassinated. The Valois dynasty she had fought so hard to preserve died with him. The throne passed to the Huguenot prince she had chosen as her son-in-law, Henry of Navarre, who became King Henry IV. Catherine de' Medici is a complex and controversial figure. She was a patron of the arts who brought the Renaissance to France. She was a devoted mother who fought to protect her son's legacy. She was also a ruthless politician who operated in a brutal age. Was she a villain, or a survivor, a peacemaker, or a warmonger? Perhaps she was all of these things, a queen who used every tool at her disposal, diplomacy, marriage, and violence, in a desperate, and ultimately failed, attempt to save her kingdom from itself. Number 4, what do you do with freedom after 16 years in prison? She was Queen of France, then she was Queen of England. She was one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in 12th century Europe. Her second husband, King Henry II of England, imprisoned her for 16 years. When he died, she was released. In her late 60s and old age for the time, she embarked on the most powerful phase of her life, ruling the vast Angevin Empire for her son, Richard the Lionheart. Her name was Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor's life was extraordinary from the start. She was not just a princess, she was the ruler of the huge and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine in southwestern France. In 1137, at the age of 15, she married the heir to the French throne, Louis. A few weeks later, they became King and Queen of France. The marriage was a poor match. Louis was a devout, quiet man. Eleanor was high-spirited, intelligent, and worldly. She accompanied him on the Second Crusade, a disastrous military expedition to the Holy Land. There were scandalous rumors about her conduct. The marriage produced 2 daughters, but no sons. After 15 years, they had the marriage annulled. Just 8 weeks later, Eleanor made a brilliant political move. She married the young Duke of Normandy, Henry Plantagenet. He was 11 years younger than her, energetic and ambitious. 2 years later, in 1154, he became King Henry II of England. Eleanor was now Queen of England. Together, they ruled a vast collection of territories that stretched from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees Mountains in Spain, the Angevin Empire. For the first decade of their marriage, they were a formidable team. They had 8 children together, including 5 sons. But their relationship soured. Henry was a notorious womanizer. He took a famous mistress, Rosamund Clifford. Eleanor became increasingly resentful. She moved her court to Poitiers in her own duchy of Aquitaine. In 1173, her sons, encouraged by Eleanor, launched a major rebellion against their father, King Henry II. The revolt failed. Henry was furious. He forgave his sons, but he would not forgive his wife. He had Eleanor captured and placed under house arrest. For the next 16 years, she was moved from one castle to another in England, a prisoner of her own husband. In 1189, Henry II died. Their eldest surviving son, Richard, became king. One of Richard I's first acts was to order his mother's release. Eleanor was 67 years old. After 16 years of confinement, she was free, and she was more powerful than ever. Richard the Lionheart was a great warrior, but he had little interest in governing England. He spent almost his entire reign outside the country, first on the Third Crusade, and then in captivity in Germany. During his long absences, he entrusted the rule of his empire to his mother. Eleanor became the regent. She was a brilliant administrator. She traveled throughout England, securing the loyalty of the nobles for her absent son. She raised the enormous ransom required to free Richard from his German prison. She dealt with the plots of her youngest and most treacherous son, John, who tried to seize the throne while Richard was away. She governed not just England, but also managed her own vast lands in Aquitaine. Even after Richard returned and then died a few years later, Eleanor's work was not done. Her son John became king. She was now nearly 80, but she remained a key political player. She worked to secure John's claim to the throne against a rival claimant. She traveled across the Pyrenees Mountains to a Spanish kingdom to select one of her granddaughters to marry the heir to the French throne, a diplomatic mission to secure peace. She finally retired to Fontevraud Abbey, where she died in 1204 at the age of 82. She had outlived all but 2 of her 10 children. She had been queen of 2 countries. She had survived a crusade, a failed marriage, a long imprisonment, and the betrayals of her own family. Her life after her husband's death was not one of quiet retirement. It was the culmination of her political career, a period when she ruled an empire and proved herself to be one of the most capable and resilient women of the Middle Ages. Number 3. How does a wife overthrow her husband? She was a German princess sent to Russia to marry the heir to the throne. She found her husband to be a fool and a boor. She learned Russian, converted to the Orthodox faith, and won the hearts of the Russian people and the military. 6 months after her husband became emperor, she led a coup, overthrew him, and took the throne for herself. She went on to rule Russia for 34 years, expanding its territory and presiding over a golden age. This was Catherine the Great. Her name was originally Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst. She came to Russia in 1744 at the age of 15. Her mission was to marry Peter, the heir of the reigning Empress Elizabeth. The marriage was a disaster. Peter was immature and cruel. He played with toy soldiers and openly took mistresses, boasting about them to his wife. Catherine was intelligent, ambitious, and trapped in a loveless marriage. She decided to make the best of her situation. While her husband alienated everyone at court, Catherine worked to win allies. She learned the Russian language fluently. She embraced the Russian Orthodox faith with genuine devotion. She read voraciously, studying the works of the great Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. She cultivated friendships with powerful nobles and military officers. She was preparing herself. In 1762, Empress Elizabeth died. Her husband became Emperor Peter III. His reign was a catastrophe. He was a great admirer of the Prussian king, Frederick the Great, who had been Russia's enemy. He immediately made peace with Prussia, giving up all the gains Russia had made in a long and costly war. This was seen as a national humiliation. He alienated the powerful Orthodox Church by trying to reform it along Protestant lines. He insulted the elite guards regiments, his most important military support. In just a few months, he had made powerful enemies everywhere. He also threatened Catherine. He made it clear he intended to divorce her, imprison her, and marry his mistress. Catherine knew she had to act first or be destroyed. Her allies at court, particularly her lover Grigory Orlov and his brothers in the guards regiments, had already been planning a coup. The moment came in late June 1762. One of the conspirators was arrested. Fearing the whole plot would be revealed, they decided to act immediately. In the middle of the night, Alexei Orlov rode to the palace where Catherine was staying and woke her up. "It is time to get up," he said. "Everything is prepared for your proclamation." She dressed in the uniform of an officer of the guards and rode to the barracks of the Izmailovsky regiment. They immediately swore allegiance to her. Other regiments followed. The church and the Senate proclaimed her the ruler of Russia. It was a swift, bloodless coup. Peter III was at another palace outside the capital. When he heard what was happening, he panicked. He failed to act decisively. He was soon arrested and forced to sign a letter of abdication. A few days later, he was dead. The official cause was an attack of hemorrhoids. Almost everyone believed he had been murdered by the Orlov brothers. Whether Catherine ordered his death or simply allowed it to happen is still debated, but his death secured her throne. If Catherine was now Empress of Russia, she had no legal claim to the throne. She was a German usurper. But she proved to be a far more capable ruler than her husband. Her reign is considered the golden age of the Russian Empire. She was an enlightened despot. She corresponded with Voltaire. She founded schools. She was a great patron of the arts and sciences. She also dramatically expanded the Russian Empire. Her armies won major victories against the Ottoman Empire, securing Russia's southern frontier and access to the Black Sea. She oversaw the partitions of Poland, adding huge territories to the west. By the end of her reign, Russia was more powerful than ever. She was a complex ruler. Her enlightened ideals often clashed with the reality of ruling a vast, backward country based on serfdom. A massive peasant rebellion led by Pugachev terrified her and led her to become more autocratic. She was also famous for her personal life, taking a series of young male lovers well into her old age, whom she often promoted to high positions. Catherine the Great was not a typical dowager queen who inherited power through her son. She became a widow by making herself one. She seized power in her own right through her intelligence, ambition, and ruthless political skill. She ruled not as a regent, but as an autocrat, and left a legacy as one of Russia's most formidable and successful rulers. Number 2, how do you avenge a murder with fire and birds? Her husband was murdered by a tribe he was trying to tax. They sent ambassadors to her suggesting she marry their prince. She had the first group of ambassadors buried alive. She had the second group burned to death in a bathhouse. She then traveled to her husband's killers, held a funeral feast, and had her soldiers slaughter 5,000 of them while they were drunk. Finally, she laid siege to their main city. She offered them peace in exchange for a tribute of 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house. When they delivered the birds, she had her soldiers tie a piece of sulfur-bound cloth to each bird's leg, lit it, and release them. The birds flew back to their nests, setting the entire city on fire. This was Olga of Kiev. This story, which comes from the Russian Primary Chronicle, is a semi-legendary account of how a 10th century woman secured her power. Olga was the wife of Igor of Kiev, ruler of the Kievan Ruses, a state of East Slavic tribes. In 945, Igor traveled to the lands of a tribe called the Drevlians to collect tribute. He was exceptionally greedy. After collecting the usual amount, he decided to go back for more. The Drevlians were enraged. They captured Igor and killed him. His son Sviatoslav was only 3 years old. This left Olga as regent. The Drevlians saw an opportunity. They controlled a large territory. They thought they could force the young widow to marry their prince Mal and thereby gain control over all of Kievan Ruses. They sent their 20 best men to Kiev to make the proposal. Olga greeted them with seeming kindness. She told them she was honored by their proposal. She told them to wait in their boat, and that the next day her people would carry them in the boat to her court. The Drevlians, proud of this great honor, agreed. The next morning, the people of Kiev carried the boat with the ambassadors in it. But instead of taking them to the palace, they threw the boat and the men into a deep trench that Olga had ordered dug. And Olga came to the edge of the trench and asked them if they found the honor to their taste. Then she had them buried alive. She then sent a message to the Drevlians. She said she would accept their proposal, but she needed them to send their most distinguished men to accompany her on the journey. The Drevlians, unaware of the fate of the first delegation, proudly sent a party of their best chieftains. When they arrived, Olga told them to refresh themselves in a bathhouse after their long journey. Once they were inside, she had the doors barred and set the building on fire. Everyone inside was burned alive. Olga was not finished. She sent another message to the Drevlians. She said she was coming to their capital, Iskarostan, to hold a funeral feast for her husband at his burial mound. She told them to prepare a great deal of mead. The Drevlians, still unaware of the fate of their two delegations, obeyed. Olga arrived with a small group of soldiers. At the feast, she encouraged the Drevlians to drink. When they were drunk and unarmed, she gave a signal to her soldiers. They fell upon the Drevlians, and according to the chronicle, massacred 5,000 of them. She then returned to Kiev, raised a large army, and came back to destroy the Drevlians completely. She laid siege to their city of Iskarostan for a year. The city would not fall, so Olga devised her final, brilliant, and terrifying plan. She sent a message to the besieged city. She told them her vengeance was complete. She had killed their ambassadors and their warriors. She would now lift the siege and grant them peace. All she asked for was a small tribute, 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house. The desperate people of Iskarostan were overjoyed. They quickly gathered the birds and sent them to Olga. That evening, Olga instructed her soldiers to attach a small piece of cloth bound with sulfur to the leg of each bird using a thread. At nightfall, they lit the cloths and released the birds. The pigeons and sparrows flew back to their nests in the thatched roofs and eaves of the houses inside the city walls. The entire city was set ablaze. As the people fled the burning city, Olga's soldiers captured them. Some were killed, others were given to her followers as slaves, and the rest were left to pay a heavy tribute. After this brutal campaign, Olga's authority as regent was absolute. No one dared to challenge her. She went on to be a very effective ruler. She established a system of administrative centers and reformed the collection of tribute, so the abuses that led to her husband's death would not be repeated. Her most significant act was her conversion to Christianity. She traveled to Constantinople and was baptized by the Byzantine emperor and patriarch. She tried to bring the new faith to her people, but her son Sviatoslav, a fierce pagan warrior, refused to convert. It was her grandson, Vladimir the Great, who would eventually make Christianity the state religion. For her efforts, Olga was later named a saint in the Orthodox Church. Her story, a mixture of history and legend, is a powerful tale of how a widow's grief was transformed into a cold, calculating, and brutal vengeance that secured a kingdom for her son. Number 1, what does it take for a woman to be erased from history? She was the wife of a Han Dynasty emperor. After he died, she became the Empress Dowager. She ruled China for 15 years as regent for her son and then her grandsons. To secure her power, she had her husband's favorite concubine turned into a human swine. She had the concubine's limbs cut off, her eyes gouged out, her ears deafened, and her voice destroyed with poison, then had her thrown into a latrine. She installed her own family members in all the highest positions of government, nearly seizing the throne for her own clan. Her name was Empress Luji. Luji was the wife of Liu Bang, the founder of the Han Dynasty. She was with him from the beginning when he was just a minor official. She shared his struggles as he fought in the civil wars that brought down the Qin Dynasty and established the Han. She was a strong and capable partner. When Liu Bang became Emperor Gaozu, she became his empress. But as emperor, Gaozu began to favor a young and beautiful concubine, Lady Qi. Lady Qi had a son, Rui, whom the emperor doted on. He began to consider replacing the crown prince Liu Ji's son, Liu Ying, with the younger Rui. This was a mortal threat to Liu Ji and her son. She fought back fiercely. With the help of powerful court officials, she managed to secure her son's position as heir. but she never forgave Lady Qi. When Emperor Gaozu died in 195 BC, Lu Ji's moment came. Her son became Emperor Hui. As Empress Dowager, she held the real power, and she immediately set about taking her revenge. She had Lady Qi arrested and thrown into prison. She had her son Rui summoned to the capital. Emperor Hui, her own son, knew what his mother was planning. He was a kind-hearted young man and tried to protect his half-brother. He kept Rui by his side at all times, even sleeping in the same room. But one morning, the emperor went out hunting. It was the only chance Lu Ji needed. When he returned, Rui was dead, poisoned. Then she turned her full fury on Lady Qi. She subjected her to the horrific torture that became known as the human swine. After mutilating her, she had her displayed to courtiers. She even brought her own son, the emperor, to see it. When he realized who the creature in the latrine was, he was so horrified that he fell ill for a year. He told his mother he could no longer rule the empire after seeing what she had done. He gave up all pretense of governing and turned to a life of pleasure. He died a few years later, still in his early 20s. With her son dead, Lu Ji's power was absolute. She placed his infant son on the throne, but she was the one who ruled. When that child emperor began to ask questions about his mother's death, Lu Ji had also had her killed. She had him removed and replaced with another infant grandson. She was the sole undisputed ruler of the Han Empire. She began to systematically replace the Liu family loyalists with members of her own Liu clan. She appointed her brothers and nephews as kings and marquises, positions the Emperor Gaozu had sworn should only ever be held by members of the imperial Liu family. She was effectively trying to usurp the dynasty and replace it with her own. Despite her personal cruelty and nepotism, Lu Ji was a competent ruler. She followed a policy of peace and stability. She avoided costly wars. She reduced taxes on the peasants. She encouraged agriculture. The country prospered under her rule. For 15 years, she held the empire together and governed it effectively. She died in 180 BC. As soon as she was gone, the storm broke. The Liu family loyalists, led by veteran officials and generals from her husband's time, staged a coup. They massacred the entire Liu clan in the capital. Every one of her relatives, young and old, was put to death. They removed the puppet emperor she had installed and placed another of Emperor Gaozu's sons on the throne. The Han dynasty was restored. The official history was then written by the victors. Lu Ji was portrayed as a monstrous, evil usurper. Her brutal revenge on Lady Qi became her defining act. Her competent and peaceful governance was downplayed, and they tried to erase her legitimate rule, casting it as an illegitimate interruption. Her story became a cautionary tale used for centuries to warn of the dangers of letting women hold power. She was a queen who became more powerful than any emperor, but whose legacy was deliberately and systematically blackened, leaving behind only the memory of her cruelty and ambition.